Hi, just Michelle again. Princess of Freedom. Right before I finally sat to make this video, which might have to come in installments because I'm in the middle of many things, but Emma Watson popped up in social media saying something like, growing into the person we are meant to be becomes very hard and scary at times. That becomes more true as we age. My dad liked to quote Mae West, "Growing old ain't for sissies." But as my birthday approaches, I'm also quite aware that growing old is not a gift that everyone receives. Taking a break from this other online course I'm taking to learn AI. I'm trying to build out the website for the princessoffreedom.com. I hope it's done before my birthday. It is not an easy course. I had never heard of most of the apps required, nor the verbiage in terms of how you use them. I don't think social media existed when I was the age Emma Watson is now, and I'm not sure if my life would have been better or worse if it had. Part of my journey back to wellness on YouTube talks about physical exercises, the wellness triathlon I do each month, the meditations I do regularly, that urban meditation. But I also am trying to put into context the origin story of the Princess of Freedom name and how it came after the birth of the Prince of Freedom that you can find online at princeoffreedom.com was the original website. And then during the pandemic, I created princeoffreedom.net so I could have an e-commerce site when I partnered with Homebase to raise money through the sale of my limited edition prints, the Prince of Freedom. And I gave 20% to Homebase, 40% to Essential Art, etc. But if you go to that site, somewhere in there, I also refer back to George Magazine. And this seems like a timely place to insert this video because a few days ago I had come home from work and I turned the TV on while I was making dinner. And as I've mentioned in other videos, I intentionally don't turn the TV on a lot because I'm trying to reduce the stress in my life. Also part of my journey back to wellness. We need to be more intentional with what we put into our body physically with the diet. I just had salmon for lunch with some fresh vegetables grilled up and herbs from my garden. But we need to be intentional with what we fill our senses with, our eyes, our ears, our mind. Anyhow, we are bombarded with social media, emails, text messages, YouTube even. I'm part of it. But I'm choosing to try and be comfortable on this side to share my truth because this is also part of my journey back to wellness. I have been silent for so long. I have been silenced for so long. But a few nights ago, there on TV was a recap of John Kennedy Jr. and the beginning of the story of how George Magazine was founded. And it was surreal for me to be watching it because I realize now how incredibly young I was then. I was probably an undergrad, and I had just begun writing my manuscript as an undergrad. That became my first independently produced film and the book published, Hung Jury, which I talked about 2 videos ago. And last video I talked about James Patterson's book, Obsessed. So I seem to be on a literary trend here. This, of course, is magazine. Some may argue not exactly literary, but fascinating, including all the ads for cigarettes, which I don't know if they're allowed to even do cigarette promotions anymore. Other, facts that jumped out at me. Oh, look, there's a photo of P. Diddy in one of the mentions, notable independents, individuals and a few eccentrics at the Newman's Own George Award dinner for the most generous company in America. Paul Newman and his wife, Joanne Woodward, were there. Lovely people. And apparently Sean Puffy Combs and Ingrid Casares, I'm not sure who that is, but we've now heard some news, which is why I mentioned my book, Hung Jury, 2 videos ago. It's surreal to me to know I wrote a book. It was fiction, but it was checkered with broken characters in a very broken world. And it was the main character I named Estrella, whose name I borrowed from the Greek goddess of truth. And it was her quest for truth, justice, and unconditional love in a world comprised of mixed metaphors, non sequiturs, landmines, all kinds of very broken people. Nobody back then was talking about quote-unquote human trafficking. I do believe, though, in several of the courses I was studying, there were elements of what we can now look at, and I must have sensed enough to put together in this book. We definitely were learning about things like drugs in society. In fact, I think that was the name of an actual course I took, and question why some things are legal, like prescription drugs, some things were illegal, like marijuana. This was decades ago. I believe that's legal in most states around the United States now. Some drugs are still considered illegal. Well, in the context of studying all of this, nobody mentioned what P. Diddy was doing with all kinds of people behind the scenes. Nobody mentioned the name Jeff Epstein, and specifically to don't go to places where people like that are, or don't do business, or banking, or, again, as an adult, I do so often wish things became more clear. As Emma Watson said, growing into who you are meant to be, or becoming, it's hard, and there is no roadmap. George Magazine, I have these in a box in the closet, hundreds of this magazine from July 1999. They were mailed to me the same day that I got the phone call that his plane was missing. Days later, the reality became quite clear. Debris was washing ashore. It was no longer missing. I postponed my film screening for hung jury, and I asked my dear friend, who was also my neighbor and helped as my PA, personal assistant, to put my film together. His name was Jeb Killian. Such a dear, sweet friend, but also a little older, a lot wiser in many ways. And he had formerly worked as Joe Kennedy's press secretary. I had asked him to keep my name in the project out of the news because all the media outlets at the time were calling, wanting to know what I was going to do with the film screening. But I didn't want to be part of that news cycle. It's really hard to wrap your head around the reality of what it was like then. Anybody like Emma Watson, or I don't know how old she is really, people in the United States who are able to vote currently were not even alive at the time any of this happened. They are probably very well educated, many of them very good people, but they have no perspective of how massive the tragedy was that John Kennedy, President John Kennedy, who was assassinated, only son, tragically, as they said in the news special a few days ago, his life was cut short. And so that's what this video, it's resonating through me. Like life, when you are growing into who you are supposed to be, these are such huge concepts, and it's so tragic when we see lives we believe are cut short. I just had two friends I was informed pass away. They were in their 80s. It's no less sad, and their widows are no less grieving at the loss at any age. Yes, they lived beautiful, long lives full of amazing people and amazing friends. But every single day is a gift that none of us really knows. And who we become, these are the bigger, deeper questions. I welcome feedback. Is it destined who we were to become because of who we were born to, the circumstances of our life? Is it the nature of who we are, or, the nurture of the love or the opportunity we get? Is it a little combination of both? My Uncle John liked to say good genes and good luck are all you can ask for in life. I know we say a lot of things tongue-in-cheek, but hard work and perseverance and patience also comes into play. I'm sharing this long story of mine because there are a lot of young people in this world who might feel as though their life doesn't matter, or they're not important. Or worse, there were 4 teenagers who murdered my friend Mark Belmore when I myself was still a teenager. It's one of the reasons I was inspired to write hung jury, one of the reasons I was inspired to study social theory and political economics. Allegedly, they decided amongst themselves that they were going to murder the first white person they found, and that person happened to be Mark Belmore, who was a Northeastern student. And they did it because Charles Stewart, a man in Boston, murdered his wife and blamed it on a black man with a gun. And so the police rightly went with that tip, looking for who they believed the criminal was, because he had been committing similar crimes. But the black community ended up very upset, claiming he got blamed for everything that wasn't their fault. And these teenagers took it upon themselves because they felt as though nothing was ever going to change. It's a very long way of trying to explain the world in which we think we live is just a part of the world in which we actually live. What we see in the news, what we hear in the media, social media, whatnot, it's a fraction of the full reality. I'm not saying journalists are bad. I'm not trying to imply that news is fake. But all journalists are human. And they have deadlines and they have jobs. And they are trying to get stories done to please their boss, or to get a promotion, or to get a different job altogether. None of this story has been in the news for 20-something years, almost 30 years. Hung jury existed. There was a film produced. There was a book published. It was written in the 1990s. The film existed in 1999, and this magazine, boxes of them, were mailed to me to be distributed at the film screening. I didn't want to be part of that negative, sad news cycle out of courtesy to the grieving families. I could have. It was major news. I didn't want to make my success story at the expense or demise of anybody. It was tragic for me, obviously, a 20-something-year-old. I was at the height of what I thought success might be. I had finally, done something that I really worked so hard to get respected for my brains and my effort, not just my physicality, which back in the 90s, it was not easy. Women were not given credit to be writers, producers, or directors. It's still a big effort for women in Hollywood, even people like Reese Witherspoon and all the people who are big names, much bigger than mine. Some even trying to imply played characters sort of mocking my life. But I love them. I truly do. And I'm grateful for Hollywood to be able to entertain and educate. But there are real people like me. My life matters too. And if you're watching this and you feel like your life is not important because your name isn't as popular as someone else, please remember your life matters. And some of the people whose names were really big, like Sean Combs, changed it to Puffy, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, probably changed it for reasons we now know. Not all that glitters is gold. Be true to yourself, be a good person, work really hard, and sometimes staying silent is the right thing. But sometimes finding the courage to speak your truth is also part of your journey into becoming who you're meant to be.